The chefs that we work with, they sort of understand that we can't just supply them with a whole lot of pigs without, or a whole lot of loin, or a whole lot of shoulder, or a whole lot of anything else. It's more a case of, this is what we can supply if you can work with it.
This is The Crackling. I'm Anthony Huckstep. Growing up in a multi-generational farming family in New Zealand, Jono Hurst always had a strong connection to the land. But lured by the big city lights, he built a career in the hospitality sector until the magnetic pull of the country life was too much to ignore. Buoyed by his belief in quality food, he and his wife Nat created an incredible farm that not only produces quality meat and produce, but helps regenerate the land too. Jono, you're kind of a new breed of farmer, but what you're doing isn't necessarily new. Tell us a bit about your approach to farming.
I guess our approach to farming, a bit of history, I guess. I come from a multi-generational farming family in New Zealand, but spent quite a few years working in hospitality, all of it front of house. So I had a real connection with food there. So wanted to do something farming that related to food in a small and niche way. So our approach to farming is ideally producing a great product from a small scale, using rare breeds, and ultimately using regenerative agricultural practices to really look after the land that we're working on, and producing food from. So I guess that's where we've come at it from. That's.
You mentioned you came from a hospitality background with working front of house. What made you do the shift to farming?
Well, as I said, I grew up on a farm in New Zealand. I'd always liked that. I didn't see the opportunities as an 18-year-old that I wanted to continue it. I liked the lifestyle, but I also liked the big lights and bright lights of the city. And then as I matured, and I spent 20 years, probably 10 in New Zealand, or probably 8 in New Zealand, and another 10 or 12 in Melbourne, and then later in Dalesford, working in restaurants. I sort of thought, I can't do this forever. Well, I could, but it might be detrimental to my health and well-being. So let's look at a way of staying within food, with good food, but maybe approaching it from a different angle, which was, let's become a producer.
Take me back to New Zealand when you were young. You mentioned the multi-generational sort of farming background your family has. Well, what was life like for you as a kid?
Oh, it was great. Multi-generational. It's currently, this year will be the 100th year that the family farm has been in the Hurst name. So my father's uncle took it in a ballot, and that was after the First World War in 1922. It will be 1922. Yeah. So my father grew up there, I grew up there, and my sister and her husband are now running it. Childhood was motorbikes, horses, sheep and cattle, and later Dad had deer. It was all very. It was 800 acres, so it was a moderately large farm in the area it was, but it was supplying commodities. So it was supplying lambs for export. It was supplying beef for the national and international market. It wasn't necessarily supplying to a local butchers or anything like that. They grew a bit of grain for their own use, but it was predominantly you grew the animals and you sent them on a truck and sold them to the the agent or the abattoir or the processing company, and that was the last you saw of it. And, well, you got the check, but yeah. Um, yes. Yeah, so that was but yeah, I loved it. It was great. Beautiful scenery, beautiful place to grow up. And yeah, loved it.
How different has it been sort of immersing yourself in the farming life compared to what you remembered as being a kid of what life was like back then?
Um yeah, it's interesting actually. A lot of it and a lot of the principles Dad probably followed a lot of the sort of more so in grazing practices. Um, Dad was reasonably progressive in his style of farming and um, tried to manage it as efficiently as possible, so he's not having staff. Um, so a lot of the grazing practices and stuff I remember as a kid, I've um, sort of readopted. I left. We left. I left the farm and went to high school, and then went on overseas. So I only really spent time on the farm after I was about 16. Um, so coming back to it in my mid 30s, there was a lot of stuff came back to me quite naturally. There's a lot of stuff I sort of had to um, ask, and there's a lot of phone calls to Dad in those days. But yeah, no, it's most things have sort of worked out well from that. So that I guess you grow up with that when you're growing up on a farm and lived it and breathed it all your life and for generations. It's sort of ingrained there somewhere. So a lot of it does just come to me, uh, and a lot of it I spend a lot of time thinking about before it comes to me.
I know you're doing a number of things there on the property, but tell us a bit about the region. What makes it such a good region for growing pigs?
That's wonderful. We're situated about 500 metres above sea level in central Victoria in a town called Dalesford. We're just on the northern side of the Great Dividing Range, so our catchment eventually ends up in the Murray after going through several smaller rivers and tributaries to get there. We have cold winters. We can have weeks and weeks and weeks without sun and just dreary, miserable weather. But we have a definite four season type of we definitely have four seasons throughout the year. Summers can be at this time of the year, so we're in February now. It can be very hot and dry, but at the same time, we've had good rain leading up until now, so it's been a bit of a blessing at this moment. Our particular farm is sort of surrounded by some volcanoes, dormant and extinct. So the area is very high volcanic, fertile soils. Lots of minerals in the soils, which we believe has a huge impact on the way our animals grow and the way the feed we grow for animals grows as well. So the other great thing about it is it's quite a well-renowned area for food and the likes. So with a lot of credit for that. So a lot of credit for that probably goes to Ella Wolf-Tusker from Lake House, who really put Dalesford and the culinary region on the map. So, and it's also a proximity to Melbourne. I'm an hour and 15 minutes, hour and a half maybe from Melbourne, to a market of 4 million people on the door. Not that we'll ever produce enough for that, but it's the size of the market that's there, and we do a lot of farmers markets. So that has a great, it's great for this region as well.
You growing Berkshire pigs on property. Well, tell us a bit about that breed. Why did you select Berkshire?
We selected them because they were a good, hardy outdoor breed. We selected them because they have a good, moderate-sized litter without being over large, I guess. I find I didn't want 14s and 16 piglets and having to keep all of them going. Whether an 8, a 10, or even a 12 is a lot easier easier on the sow, and also easier just to get them all through to a good size. Um, they're a great forager of the forages and the forage crops that we grow for them, and the likes of that. And just and again, get back down to their meat as well, with their lane of intramuscular fat as opposed to a large back fat cap, means selling the pork, especially in a farmer's market situation. Well, I like a lot of fat and love it for its flavour. Not all customers do, and so we can sell a chop with 10 to 15 mil of fat, and it looks fantastic. So we're not dealing with 25 mil of fat. Again, that's probably an attribute to outdoors and some of the cold winters they have as well. So yeah, but and they're a fun breed as well. They're very entertaining, very active. I've been to friends' places with large whites or large blacks with the ears over their eyes, and they just sort of mope around. But the Berkshires are a lot more active, in my opinion.
What's life like on the farm for the pigs? Can you give us sort of the life cycle of what they experience?
Yeah. Okay, so they sows are in with a boar until about 2 weeks prior to farrowing, judging on how they're looking. I'll bring them out and bring them into a maternity paddock as such with individual huts. And generally speaking, I like to have 2 or 3 sows. I have 18 sows at the moment. So I like to have about 2 or 3 sows come on together. So we're sort of bringing a batch of piglets through together. Piglets are born in a hut, in straw, outside. Sometimes the sow decides that she doesn't want to have the piglets in the hut with straw, and will go and make a farrowing nest under a gorse bush. Or I've had one that completely got out of the maternity paddock, went and I found her down by the dam on Christmas Eve, under a gorse bush with 9 piglets. And I'm like, you've got no shade here, love. You're right in there at a fox haven below the dam. I don't think you should stay here. So my daughter drove the ute, and carried the piglets back on the back of the ute, and I managed to convince the sow to go back up towards somewhere that was a little bit more homely. But yeah, no, piglets are born outside. They're with mums in the maternity paddock for up to 2 months, maybe a little bit longer. It all depends on how they grow. I sort of wean by eye and by size rather than by date on the calendar. And then we'll run paddocks of weaners, and we run paddocks of growers, and we run paddocks of finishers, and they sort of progress up through those stages. Being fed twice a day, water wallows being topped up twice a day, moved onto different paddocks, retaining ground cover. So we move as required. Again, not really set to calendar. So we won't let the pigs sort of create a moonscape of the paddocks, which is really important to us. And then when it comes to the right size, the finisher paddock comes down to the shed once a week on a Tuesday morning, and I select who's going off to the abattoir down in Melbourne and draft them off. And then that evening, about 5 or 6 o'clock, I take them down. I try to take them down as late as possible so they don't spend too much time in a big commercial abattoir. And then they're processed first thing tomorrow morning. and then they'll be transported to my butcher, who will cut to my recommendations or requirements, and either go to markets or to a few restaurants that we supply. So that's the general life cycle, I guess. Yeah, sort of. We average, depending on what size we're killing, whether it's 60 or 70 kilo dressed weight, or if it's 50 kilo dressed weight, it's between sort of 9 and 11 months, I guess, depending on how they're growing and all those sort of things.
You mentioned the Berkshire breed are real characters on the farm. Do you have any stories or funny moments or challenges involved in farming them?
Yeah, plenty. Piglets getting out is just was when we first started. I was like, I've got to fence everything, and everything's going to be perfect and everything else. And I spent ages trying to get everything right. And people are talking to Glenn Ira, who I bought my foundation stock off. I think he just said to me one day, "Mate, you just got to jump in there, buy the pigs. You'll find out what you need to do as you go on." So a lot of the fencing I did was absolutely worthless because they just went right through it. So I have since worked out over time, and little ones. I now have a sort of a double netting fence that's about 1.5 feet off the ground all the way around the base, so they can't get through. Otherwise, they just get through the first netting, and they'll just little piglets or sows and older piglets. If there's an electric fence, they'll sort of check it out and sense it, and if they happen to touch it with their nose, they'll get a hell of a shock because they tend to be wet. Little piglets will, by the time they've got the shock, they may be on the back of their neck or on their back, and they're already through the fence. So we had piglets rocking up the driveway across the road. We had neighbours stopping and saying, "You've got pigs on the road again." And at this stage, we weren't actually living on the farm, so I get phone calls and have to drive 15 minutes to go and get the piglets in, and it's sort of learning as I went, and we managed. Now we have most of the time everything where it should be. I often get a photo from my wife saying, "That sow doesn't look like she's meant to be where she is," and things like that. But generally speaking, we don't have them as close to the road, so we don't have them out there. I did have a sow that used to just jump clean fences, like you would have thought you would. I mean, it was only 2 foot 600, maybe 700 millimeters high, but she could just clearly jump a fence. Like if I'd feed in a mob on one side of the fence, she wanted that food, she'd jump over, then I'd go back and feed the other. She'd food over there now, and she could just jump. We've got some great photos of her in full extension over the fence. So yeah, she's quite a character. She's a bit older now. She's not as active.
You mentioned that you're using regenerative agriculture. Can you tell us what that is and how that plays out on the farm?
It's funny because we sort of started and we're like, well, we'll follow organic practices and we won't spray or use chemicals and use synthetic fertilizers. And that would always been a principle coming from working in the food industry. I didn't want to sort of put that into food. So sort of doing that. And then we met this group, and actually one of the founding members of the Central Victorian Regenerative Farmers Group. And it was like, we're already doing this, but this actually has a name. And then we did some more research into it and everything else, and found out there's a whole lot more principles to it other than what we were just doing. So it's really been like we've kind of found our tribe from that. So to me, the principle of regenerative agriculture is looking after the soil. So healthy soil produces healthy plants, which we are feeding to our animals, and therefore that creates healthy food. So from the ground up, if you're looking after the soil and the microbiology in the soil, then you're creating a healthier ecosystem. So as I mentioned before, we don't like moonscapes. We try to keep as much ground cover on the farms as we can. We do a lot of cover cropping, so I watched a TED talk or a YouTube channel thing with Dr. Christine Jones, and I was just blown away by it. And by chance, about 3 months later, she was visiting our area, and our regen group managed to coax her into coming and having a chat to us. So she came and visited our farm, and she'd never seen pigs working. And I'd sown some multi-species cover crops earlier that season. So this was about September, and they were grazing. And she said, "I've never seen pigs graze." She just loved it, and we and she was really blown away by it and what we were doing. And then we looked around at other places, and she gave us some great advice. And we'd always been no-till this and no-till that, and the pigs on the areas of the farm that we farm pigs obviously till up the area, but there's other areas where we farm cattle where she said sometimes you have to cultivate once just to break the back of it and get everything started. So and from that we've sort of gone to strength to strength. We're starting to use worm teas on our cover crop. So we sow out a multi-species cover crop, and then we produce a worm tea from worm castings, and then we'll spray that on about 4 or 5 days after sowing, and inoculation of seed, and all sort of different attributes to regenerative agriculture. And there's a lot of them there, but ultimately it comes down to looking after the soil and preserving ground cover. So yeah, no, we're very much enjoying it and seeing the benefits too.
Tell me about the benefits that has on the meat that you're producing. What sort of impact does it have on the final product?
I can't vouch. I can't say it alters the taste, but the animals are, but the animals are just growing really well. So ultimately, that contributes to the taste and everything else. We used to have to drench a little bit, and that was probably more learning curve of not moving the pigs on and not and having too much of them. Now I haven't used drench or anything like that on pigs for years. So I think the animals are healthier, the soil's healthier, the plants jump out of the ground better. The bird life and the insect life, like if we've got a paddock full of cover crop that's gone to head, or I tend to like the term multi-species forage rather than cover crop, because cover cropping is more of a term used in a larger broad acre crop farms. But just having that as Nat, my wife, calls it, we call it the salad bar grazing. So by having not a monoculture for the pigs to eat, but a whole variety of sometimes 12, 15 different species growing in the paddock. I mean, it's like going to the salad bar and having a choice of everything, not just going up and getting the rice salad all the time. So, and that ultimately means the supplementary food we're feeding to them is less, because they've got more to choose from in the paddocks. And I think it's it works really well.
You mentioned that the product ends up in farmers markets or in some of the restaurants in Melbourne, for instance. Is there a best pork dish that you have experienced in a restaurant where it is your pork?
Right when we started, we did this sort of collab with Hepburn Springs Mineral Water, and oh my goodness, I can't remember that, Ladro, and Gravel Street and Pran, and they the chef's now back over in the UK, but it was early days. We've probably only been going for about 6 months, but they took a whole pig off me and created a whole meal. So did some belly, did some leg, and that was amazing. That was the first time I'd had a chef cook our pork, and that just blew us away. My wife and my daughter went down as well. I think Ruby, my daughter, would have been about 10 or 12 then. So, yeah, it was just the whole night blew us away. It was really quite special. Just first time that someone had cooked one of our pork dishes for us. And it was for a whole group. I think it was, yeah, I can't even remember what the actual reason for it was. It was a great night anyway. Yeah.
This life change that you've had sort of moving out of hospitality and into farming, which is in your family's history, what sort of impact has that had on your lifestyle?
Oh, it's been great. I've sort of swapped the 2 a.m. finishes for the 4 a.m. start some days, but um, which is probably a good thing anyway. Um, I mean, yeah, I love the working outdoors. I've loved working with nature. I like the there's hard days and the slogs and there's I used to do 16, 17 hour days on the restaurant, and some days I do that on the farm, and it's pretty tiring. But I see the benefit of what I'm doing, and the growth of what we're doing and everything else, and really enjoy it. Um, yeah.
You mentioned the importance of farmers markets for what you do as well. What do you get out of that situation at farmers markets, and why is it so important?
Um, it's well, one we're kind of small, so we're processing probably 12, maybe 14 pigs a month. So farmers markets allow us to sell all of that. And the chef, I guess, stepping away from that, the chefs that we work with, they sort of understand that we can't just supply them with a whole lot of pigs without, or a whole lot of loin, or a whole lot of shoulder, or a whole lot of anything else. It's more a case of this is what we can supply if you can work with it. And the farmers markets, again, I can taking back to my restaurant days, I can sell anything with a bit of advice on how to cook it and things like that. So we get the feedback from the farmers markets. We've made some great friends to our farmers market customers. And yeah, it's just people, and I think COVID has probably accentuated this a little bit, but people really want to know where their food's coming from. And the shoppers we get at farmers markets, and the farmers markets we tend to do are the ones where they are true shoppers markets, as opposed to let's have a wander around and we might grab something on the way out, sort of thing. The farmers markets we've ended up doing are the ones where people come in with trolleys and shopping lists, and they've been great. And the sort of feedback, and probably not so much with the pork, but with the beef that we sell for grass-fed beef, I can sort of explain the difference in the season and why it doesn't have the fat that a grain-fed animal would have on it at this time of year. So, and I guess the other thing is it's my pining for my restaurant days and my social interaction. So spend all week talking to my family on the farm. I get to a farmer's market on a weekend and I just can't shut up. So it's kind of all of those aspects that appeal to us.
You've built this amazing sort of little business over a period of time. What surprised you about the farming life?
The respect that which I've always thought would be there, but just people really appreciate what you do. And again, COVID accentuated that as well. I mean, we lost quite a few markets through COVID, but the ones that did stay, we sort of became, especially in our local Dalesford market, we were there every Sunday. And for some people, it was their only escape, was to go shopping outdoors on a Sunday morning at the market. And it was only food. And just the appreciation. It was quite humbling, actually. I guess that was probably one of the biggest surprises. I've never. I guess having grown up watching my dad on the farm and everything else, I was never afraid of the amount of work there would be. Um, I sort of always embraced that, um, and as we're getting a little bit bigger and a little bit more efficient, we're able to, and a few more systems, we're able to control that. But I was never surprised by the amount of work. I mean, animals will constantly surprise you, but yeah, no, I guess that's pretty much sums it up. Yeah.
You produce one of the most prized pork products in the country. What do you love about what you do?
I love producing good food. And again, it was sort of this whole let's get back into farming. How are we going to do it? It needs to be, we don't have enough money to buy a large farm and do commercial quantities and sell them through markets or sell them direct. So let's just do it really, really small and really, really well. So yeah, that's really what it's about. And yeah, no, that appeals to me a lot.
Well, Jono, hats off to what you guys have created there, and it's been an honour to have you on the Crackling today to hear just a bit of your story. Please keep in touch and we'll catch up again soon.
No worries, Huck. Thanks very much. I enjoyed it.
This is The Crackling, a Deep in the Weeds production in partnership with PorkStar. I'm Anthony Huckstep. Stay tuned as we catch up with some of Australia's best chefs and pork producers to discover what makes Australian pork so special.